Back in the day, when my hamlet was just a few scattered, thatch roof houses, when the cries of night vendors still haunted the damp earthen alleys, there was something far more terrifying than any ghost or demon. It was hunger. Hunger that didn't just gnaw at the stomach, but corroded one's very humanity, turning the living into something no longer human. And the story of old Mrs. Chinney, which I am about to tell, is the most chilling testament to that truth. They say that death is the end. But for old Mrs. Chinney, it was not. Her death was only the beginning. It started on a sweltering afternoon as she lay down alone in her gaping, empty house, with a hollow belly and a bitterness that could not be put into words. They said she died of old age. But I knew, and the rest of the hamlet tacitly understood, that she died of starvation, of abandonment, and a soul that perishes in such loneliness and hunger will never pass on easily. It will remain, clinging to its own putrid flesh, to reclaim all that it was denied. It will eat anything and everything it can. Eat until that borrowed vessel can hold no more, and then begin to search for a fresher delicacy.
Today's story is a memory of mine. Long ago, something that happened 3 or 4 decades ago, right in my neighborhood. Back then, our neighbor was a woman named Mrs. Chinney. I call her Mrs. Chinney for convenience, because honestly, no one really remembers her real name anymore. She was quite a unique figure in my childhood eyes. At that time, Mrs. Chinney was already over 70. My grandmother, on the other hand, was just in her 30s. Still young, energetic, and busy with housework and raising kids. Mrs. Chinney had only one son, something quite rare in those days when people believed having many children brings good fortune. Not long after giving birth to her son, her husband passed away. And she decided to remain a widow, working hard, raising her child on her own. That son, Hockey, later got married and gave her a grandchild. Like my own mother, he also had just one child. He worked as a mason, a skilled one, so he was often sent to construction sites in other provinces. Every time he got paid in advance, he would bring the money home and give it all to his wife, saying, "Please take care of our child, and look after my mother while I'm away. That way I can focus on work." But life is never that simple. The wife he trusted turned out to be cunning, deceitful, addicted to gambling. Especially fond of playing four-color card, a local card game. Behind his back, she would split the money he gave her. Half went to household expenses, the other half disappeared into the neighborhood gambling dens. Because of that, a clear divide began to show in the household. She adored her child, doting on the little one with care, making sure they had everything: food, clothes, the works. The child looked healthy and chubby. Everyone praised how well he was raised. But in contrast, Mrs. Chinney became thin and frail, barely eating 1 or 2 meager meals a day. I still remember seeing her, sitting silently by the doorway, her sunken eyes and wrinkled skin evoking pity. Then came the fateful day.
That day, her daughter-in-law once again took the child with her to gamble. She left Mrs. Chinney alone in the house. It was during that time, when no one was watching, that she collapsed. A heart attack, or something worse. She passed away quietly in that empty, silent house. No one heard a thing. The first person to discover her was Mrs. Baxham, a neighborhood elder and occasional companion of Mrs. Chinney. That day, she came by as usual, calling out from the front door, but got no answer. Worried, she slipped her hand through the door crack, undid the wire latch, and stepped inside. When she reached the back room, she screamed in terror. There lay Mrs. Chinney, thin, motionless, her mouth agape, as if she still had something to say but couldn't. She was gone, likely for hours, alone and cold. But I still remember, vividly, the day Mrs. Chinny came back from the dead. A strange, eerie event that still sends chills down my spine. That day, when Mrs. Baxam returned again, she got no response. So once more, she undid the wire and stepped inside. What happened next felt like something out of a horror movie. I remember her telling us, when she reached the inner room, she saw Mrs. Chinny lying there. Unmoving, so skinny, her mouth wide open. Terrified, she ran out to raise the alarm. She knew exactly where the daughter-in-law was. At the two-sack card game in the next neighborhood. She rushed there in a panic. As soon as she arrived, she shouted into the crowd. "Heavens, your mother-in-law just died at home. And you're here, holding your kid while playing cards? Go home and see for yourself." But the daughter-in-law stayed calm, completely unfazed. As if nothing had happened, she replied, "Oh please, I just fed her this morning. She ate just fine, only coughed a bit. Nothing serious enough to die from."
Mrs. Baxam was furious, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why would I lie to you? I went over to visit her to keep her company, and I found her lying there with her mouth wide open, not breathing at all. I even put my hand to her nose and chest, there was no movement. You better go check." Only then did the daughter-in-law finally agree to leave the game. But the way she stood up was strangely calm. Not a hint of urgency. No panic. It was like she was coming home from the market, not going to check on someone possibly dead. When they reached the house, Mrs. Baxam, still worried sick, urged her. "Go inside and see her. I'll go fetch someone to set up a funeral tent and buy a coffin." The daughter-in-law remained unbothered and replied, "Hold on, let me check first." While Mrs. Baxam hurried off to alert the neighbors, the strangest thing happened. The daughter-in-law walked into the house and screamed, "Oh my God, Mom, you're still alive?" There was Mrs. Chinny, fumbling around in the kitchen, looking for something to eat. She didn't speak to anyone, just mumbled to herself, "I'm so hungry, there's nothing left to eat in this house." Hearing that, the daughter-in-law muttered in annoyance, "For heaven's sake, she's alive and kicking, even complaining about being hungry, and that old friend of hers made it sound like she was really dead, dragged me all the way back home shouting and wailing." Then she started explaining herself. "She usually eats once around noon and again in the evening. I just fed her a little over an hour ago. There's no food left now. My husband's pay is barely enough, so I spent what we had on milk for little buy. Mom, you'll have to wait till this evening to eat." By then, Mrs. Baxam had already gathered 2 or 3 neighbors to come help. But the daughter-in-law ran outside yelling, "Oh my God, my mother-in-law is still alive. She's rummaging through the kitchen for food. You're all just making things up." My grandmother, still young at the time, also came running when she heard the commotion. She later told us that from outside the house, you could clearly see Mrs. Chinny still shuffling around inside, walking slowly back and forth, mumbling to herself. After that, everyone started turning on Mrs. Baxam, accusing her of overreacting, making a fuss over nothing. Some even claimed she was cursing Mrs. Chinny to die. But Mrs. Baxam stood her ground. "How could that be? I clearly saw her lying there, mouth wide open. I felt her nose, felt her belly, no breath, no movement. I stood there watching for a full 5 minutes. Who could hold their breath for 5 minutes?" Hearing that part sent shivers down my spine. Could it be that Mrs. Chinny really had died, but for some reason, came back to life? People in the neighborhood kept whispering about it for a few days, but eventually, it all quieted down. Everyone just assumed Mrs. Baxam had made a mistake, misjudged what she saw. Only I still felt something strange about it all. But I was just a kid then, so I didn't dare say anything. I just kept watching, silently. The next day, Mrs. Chinny's son came home. He'd been away working on a construction site, and like always, he brought gifts from the countryside, this time, 3 or 4 hens, planning to raise them for their eggs. As soon as he stepped into the yard, Mrs. Chinny began to whine. "Oh, Hockey, I haven't tasted chicken in 3 months, my dear. Hearing that, he felt sorry for her and turned to his wife. "Why don't you cook one for her? She can't eat a whole chicken anyway, we'll all share it together." His wife agreed and went to the kitchen to prepare the chicken. She placed the whole bird into a pot of water on the wood stove, and covered it with a lid. She figured it would take 45 minutes to an hour to cook it through. While waiting, the couple and their child went outside to enjoy the breeze, and feed the remaining chickens. They chatted happily, thinking they'd soon sit down to a warm, cozy family meal. Nearly an hour later, the wife returned to the kitchen to check if the chicken was ready. And screamed. Everyone rushed in, and what they found was horrifying. The pot of boiling water now held only a pinkish liquid, slightly bloody, and smelling faintly of raw meat. The chicken was gone. Scattered on the floor were bones, as if someone had torn the bird apart and eaten it raw. Pale and shaking, the wife ran into the bedroom. And just as she feared, there sat Mrs. Chinny in a corner, her mouth still smeared with raw chicken flesh, streaks of pink broth staining her lips. Her eyes were wide, her face flushed red, but she looked satisfied. Her son stood there, torn between anger and pity. He spoke with a voice both scolding and anxious. "Mom, if you were craving chicken, you could have waited until it was cooked. You're old now. What if you get food poisoning or something from eating it raw?" But Mrs. Chinny didn't seem to hear him. She just mumbled to herself, giggling like someone in a trance. "So tasty, so fragrant. This is how chicken should be eaten. Cooked meat's too soft, can't even swallow it." Her son stood there, just shaking his head. He figured maybe his mother was getting senile. Old age, after all. Back in those days, when elderly folks started acting strange, people simply called it old age sickness. No one ever thought about ghosts, or anything supernatural. He stayed home for 2 days before packing up again and heading off to another job site. And from that moment on, things began to get truly strange. The daughter-in-law later recalled, during the days her husband was away, it was like Mrs. Chinny had become someone else entirely. She no longer ate at normal mealtimes, she devoured food like a starved animal. Anything she came across, she ate. Fish sauce, soy sauce, she drank them like water. Leftovers, cold rice, scraps from dirty dishes, she would dig through and eat them all. Sometimes she even wandered into neighbors' homes, begging for food. She moved slowly, but her eyes were wild. Wide open, staring, like someone starving to the brink of madness. My grandmother recounted a particular afternoon, when Mrs. Chinny came by our house. As soon as she stepped in, she asked, "Do you have anything to eat? Please, just a little?" But the look in her eyes wasn't normal. They were empty, yet clinging, like they were latching onto every grain of rice, every leaf of vegetable on someone else's plate. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the daughter-in-law didn't treat her well, so they all pitied Mrs. Chinny. Anyone who had food would save her a bit. But over time, she became more and more strange. This went on for about 5 to 7 days. Then one day, her son came home again. This time, he brought back a huge bunch of ta qua banana, an extra-large banana variety, with fruit as thick as a forearm. When ripened and boiled, they were sweet, fragrant, and filling. As soon as he arrived, he greeted his mother, then placed the bunch of bananas in the kitchen, planning to boil a few for her later, and save the rest for future meals. Like usual, he went out into the yard to sit and chat with his wife and child. Unaware that just an hour later, they would return to the house and freeze in shock. The entire bunch of bananas, not just 1 or 2, was gone. Not a single banana left. And mind you, ta qua bananas are huge. Even half a banana can make an adult feel full, to the point of wanting to lie down and nap. Yet Mrs. Chinny had eaten all of them. They rushed into the kitchen and found her sitting on the floor, chewing furiously. Raw banana flesh smeared all over her mouth, her shirt, her pants. The son, heartbroken, cried out, "Mom, you've got to eat slower. If you're craving something, just say so. My wife would have boiled them for you. These bananas taste terrible raw. How could you eat the whole bunch?" Her stomach was now bulging, distended like that of a pregnant woman. Hard as a rock. Likely from eating too much, too fast, without time to digest. From that day on, I noticed she had changed completely. She stopped talking, barely spoke to anyone anymore. And on the rare occasions she did open her mouth, it was always just one of two phrases. "Do you have anything to eat? I'm so hungry." The elderly women in the neighborhood, like Mrs. Baxam, Mrs. Forsay, and Mrs. Saxam, still dropped by to visit from time to time, but each time they were shocked at how much Mrs. Chinny had withered away. She was becoming thinner and more emaciated by the day, skin clinging to bone, her face sunken and lifeless. Strangest of all was her belly. It remained swollen, unnaturally large, and even through her clothes, you could sometimes see something moving underneath, as if something was stirring inside her. Her eating habits baffled everyone. Whatever people gave her, she devoured without hesitation, never leaving a single bite behind. Some tested her with spoiled leftovers or sour rice. She ate those too. Others gave her soy sauce or fish sauce, and she drank them straight, as if they were water. But the most disturbing part was that she almost never used the bathroom. Sometimes 3 or 4 days would pass, and the toilet remained clean, untouched. It was as if everything she consumed no longer had any way out. Over time, her skin began to sag and loosen, giving her a grotesque, pitiful appearance. There was one day, I followed Mrs. Baxam to visit her. That day, Mrs. Chinny lay motionless on her bed, her limbs limp, her face pale, and her eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling. Not blinking, not moving. Mrs. Baxam approached her, gently took her hand, and spoke with a trembling voice. "It's me, Baxam. Don't you remember me, Mrs. Chinny? Oh dear, your son's away working, and your daughter-in-law's out gambling again? I've come to see you every day this past year. Why won't you recognize me now?" But Mrs. Chinny said nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed upward, as though trying to recognize something, or perhaps recognizing nothing at all. As if this world no longer held any meaning to her. I was still a child at the time, so I didn't understand much. I could only stand there and watch. But Mrs. Baxam remembered every detail, clearly. That day, like always, she came to visit. And she found Mrs. Chinny lying there, limp as a dry banana leaf. Her eyes vacant, fixed on the ceiling, drained of any sign of life. While speaking to her, Mrs. Baxam began gently massaging her legs, just like she always did, a kind, familiar gesture. But the moment her hands touched Mrs. Chinny's calf, she froze. She later described it. The flesh felt soft, far too soft, thin and fragile, like paper. She gave the lightest squeeze, barely a touch, and it felt as if the skin might tear open, right under her fingers. And then, something horrifying happened. Mrs. Baxam suddenly felt something cold and damp on her palm. She looked down and gasped in horror. There was a long tear along Mrs. Chinny's calf. Thick, dark red blood was slowly oozing out, sticky, sluggish, and foul. Mrs. Baxam recoiled in shock, unable to form words. How could human skin rip open so easily? As if sensing what had happened, Mrs. Chinny suddenly sat up and snatched a rag nearby. Her hands were trembling as she wrapped it tightly around her leg, as if afraid her flesh might spill out. From that moment on, she always held her calf with one hand. And there was never a time she didn't have a piece of cloth wrapped tightly around her leg. But it didn't stop there. Her face began to distort, sagging, warped. The nose crooked to one side, ears curled unnaturally. Her skin now soft and doughy, like over-kneaded paste. Every time I looked at her, I became more certain of one thing. That body no longer belonged to the living. Everything she consumed, all the rice, the water, the meat and fish, none of it seemed to nourish her dying flesh. No, it was feeding something else inside. Something hidden, something still clinging on. Her body had become like a borrowed shell, a ragged suit of skin, rotting and falling apart. Yet still being dragged forward by something that refused to let go. Then came the night her son returned home from work. This time, he had been working far away on a coastal project, maybe in Gokong or Bindai, I don't remember clearly. And the homeowner had gifted him 3 large sea crabs, each one as big as an upturned bowl, firm and heavy, with bright red roe. Overjoyed, he brought them home, hoping to cook crab porridge for his mother, something rich and nourishing. Since he came back late, traveling by boat, he placed the 3 crabs in a bucket, poured in a bit of water to keep them alive, closed the lid, and left it in the kitchen. That night, while he and his wife were cultivating internal energy in the bedroom, they suddenly heard a faint rustling, scraping noise coming from the kitchen. They figured it was just the crabs scratching around inside the bucket, and ignored it. Not until later, when they had finished, did they go out to check. And there, they saw Mrs. Chinny crouched in the kitchen, her back turned, quietly facing the wall. The son called out, "Mom? Are you hungry?" Mrs. Chinny didn't answer. She only turned her head toward him for a moment, then silently walked back into her room. His wife later said that in that brief glance, her eyes were black, pitch black, like a moonless sky. The next morning, he said cheerfully, "Mom, just rest. We'll boil the crabs for lunch. You can have one, they're huge." The wife replied with a quick, yes, then went down to the kitchen to open the bucket. And then, she screamed. The entire household rushed downstairs. Inside the bucket, there were no more crabs. Only broken shells. Empty. Shattered. As if something had torn the crabs apart while they were still alive and devoured them raw. The claws, normally hard as stone, had been crushed into bits, shredded like dried leaves. The air was thick with a fishy, salty stench, tinged with blood. But the strangest thing of all, the blood inside the bucket wasn't the usual pale liquid you'd see from crabs. It was dark red, thick, almost like human blood. Frightened, the daughter-in-law ran into the room, and as she feared, she found Mrs. Chinny sitting silently, her hands soaked in blood. Crushed and torn open, tendons exposed. But she didn't cry, she didn't groan, she just sat there, her face cold and ashen, her eyes fixed blankly into space, as if she was no longer human. Seeing his mother's hands, mangled and dripping with blood, the son was overwhelmed with grief. As he wrapped the wounds, he choked back tears. "Mom, if you wanted crab, just say so. We would have boiled them right away for you. Eating them raw like that, what if you got poisoned? Look at your hands, they're destroyed." But she didn't respond. She only lowered her head slightly, hiding her torn hands under the blanket, as if ashamed to let her son see, or as if she were hiding something far worse than a wound. He gently tried to pull her hands out again to rebandage them, tending to each tear, each gash with care. Her flesh was limp, her blood still oozing slowly. But what struck him the most was that she didn't wince. Didn't flinch, didn't show the slightest sign of pain. Her face was like ice. Expressionless, only trembling faintly under his touch. A few days later, he packed up and left for work again. Though his heart was uneasy, he had no choice. He had debts to pay, mouths to feed, a household to keep afloat. Little did he know that every drop of his sweat, every coin he sent home, was being gambled away by his wife in the neighborhood's 4 color card dens. Every time he asked about the money, she blamed rising prices, medicine for his mother, milk for little Bai. And yes, she did take care of the child well. But his mother, not even a single pill. Not a drop of proper food. Just a body, barely clinging to life, falling apart more each day. And then, it happened. That day, while he was away, his wife took a reckless gamble. And maybe, whatever was living inside his mother, that spirit, that entity, could sense something was wrong. As if it knew, it was about to be discovered. That night, mother and daughter-in-law slept in separate rooms. Back then, country homes were often split by thin leaf walls. Everything happening on one side could be heard clearly from the other. Around 7 or 8 in the evening, after tucking in her mother-in-law, she went into her room and lulled her son to sleep. But then, it began. The moaning. A deep, sorrowful, deathly sound coming from the other side of the wall. Low, drawn-out groans, like someone dying. And it wouldn't stop. The moaning dragged on, hoarse and strained, like something stuck deep in the throat. The baby tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Annoyed, she snapped. "Ma, what are you groaning about? If you can't sleep, at least let me and Bai get some rest." She stormed over, ready to scold, but before she could say anything more, her mother-in-law spoke from behind the mosquito net. Her voice was faint, but carried a bone-chilling undertone. "Hey, why don't you let little Bai sleep with me tonight? I open my eyes and he's never there anymore. Lately, you've been out all night playing cards, and by the time you get back, you take him to your bed. I miss the smell of my grandson, you know." She froze in her tracks. A pang of hesitation crept up in her. These days, her mother-in-law had lost control over her bodily functions. Her bed stank. It was always damp. Letting the child sleep there. What if something happened? While she was still contemplating, the old woman's voice came again, clearer this time, every word like a nail hammered in. "You're out gambling day and night, and I haven't said a word to your husband. You haven't bought me a single pill with the money meant for my medicine. All of it goes to those damned card games. If I told him, he'd shave your head and smear it with lime." The son remembered that night vividly. He never understood why, but his mother, or whatever was inside her body, had desperately begged to hold little Bai that night. Begged and pleaded, moaned and guilt-tripped, until his wife reluctantly agreed. She had even chuckled nervously. "Oh come on, Ma. I wasn't gambling, just running errands. I know you miss him, let me bring him over to sleep with you, all right?" At first, the boy resisted, clinging tightly to his mother. But in the end, he had to give in. Mrs. Chinney held him tightly, sniffing him like someone who had just found a long-lost treasure. "Sleep now, baby. Let Grandma take a whiff. You smell so good, like a wax doll." The daughter-in-law stood by the doorway, a strange unease creeping up her spine. But she brushed it off. It's just love. She just misses her grandchild, that's all. Not even half an hour later, there was a loud thud. Like someone being slammed into the bed. Then came a blood-curdling scream that tore through the stillness of the night. By the time she rushed into the room, the boy was already crying hysterically, his entire body trembling, his face pale as death. He wailed, "Grandma bit me. Grandma bit me." Then the little boy held out his tiny hand, and dear God, the daughter-in-law nearly fainted. The pinky finger on his left hand was gone. All that remained was a bleeding stump, dripping warm blood steadily onto the mat below. She couldn't believe her eyes. She spun around toward her mother-in-law, and froze in sheer horror. Her husband's mother, or rather, whatever was inhabiting that body, was crouched on the bed, hair hanging down in tangled clumps, her mouth chewing voraciously, saliva and blood running down her chin in thick streams. Her eyes rolled back white, her tongue licked at her lips, and she muttered like a madwoman. "Oh God, it smells so good. My grandson's meat smells just like tender flesh. Great-grandma, give me another bite, please." As she babbled, she crawled across the bed on all fours like a starved beast, just released after years in a cage. The daughter-in-law screamed like a madwoman, scooped Bai into her arms, and ran straight to her own mother's house next door. The whole neighborhood woke up. Her mother quickly grabbed a clean towel, dipped it in boiled water, and wrapped it around the boy's wound as best she could. No one dared take him to the clinic in the middle of the night. The road was too far, and there were no vehicles around. By dawn, her husband had rushed home. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the path was still shrouded in morning mist. When he arrived, his wife had already told him everything. He stood in silence, stunned, refusing to believe what he was hearing. "You're saying, my mother bit our son? That can't be true. She loved him more than anyone." Still in disbelief, he turned to ask Bai himself. The boy sat curled up, eyes still red from crying. Gently, he lifted the child into his lap and whispered, "Bai, tell Daddy, what did Grandma do to you?" Little Bai, still trembling, sobbing softly, sat on his lap, his tiny hand now with only 4 fingers. And he kept repeating the same thing, over and over, like something had burned it into his mind. Grandma bit me. Daddy, she really bit me. I was sleeping, then Mommy left the room, and Grandma asked to smell my hand, to kiss it. I gave her my hand, and then she chomped. My finger was just gone. The son felt a chill run down his spine. But what terrified him the most was the fact that his mother had lost all her teeth years ago. Not a single one remained. Her dentures were chipped, and she hadn't worn them in years. And yet, she had bitten off the boy's finger. If it wasn't with teeth, then what did she use? Where did that kind of biting force come from? How could such a frail, elderly body possess such terrifying strength? People began to sit down and piece things together. Old Mrs. Baxham recalled massaging her legs just days before, saying her flesh had felt like it was rotting, just a light squeeze had torn the skin wide open. Others remembered her devouring an entire bunch of unripe bananas, swallowing live crabs whole, shell and all, ripping apart a raw chicken straight from the pot and eating it like an animal. Fish sauce and soy sauce, she drank them like water. One by one, the disturbing memories returned, like stitching together the parts of a corpse. Each detail fell into place, until everything caught in everyone's throat, then erupted into a single horrifying realization. She's been possessed by a corpse-dwelling demon. Everyone knew the signature trait of such a demon was hunger. Insatiable, endless hunger. Hunger that drove it mad. It would eat anything, raw, rotten, cooked, bloodied or dry. No matter. The fresher, the better. The younger, the sweeter. Perhaps, in the final moments of her life, alone in the house with no one watching over her, no incense lit, no prayers spoken, that thing had crept into her newly deceased body. No one dared return to that house again. The following night, Mrs. Chinney came to our home. No, it wasn't her. It was the thing inside her corpse. It stood in our front yard, hair covering its face, eyes rolled pure white, howling into the night. Give me back my grandson. Give him back. He's mine. I'm still hungry. The entire neighborhood stayed awake. Everyone kept their doors locked tight, lights off, lying still in silence. For several nights, she came back, screaming, sobbing, clawing at doors, cursing like a beast gone mad from starvation. Her son was desperate. He searched for spiritual masters, traveling from Bindai to Mokay, even as far as Tannan. But strangely, no one was available. Some had just lost family members. Some claimed they lacked the spiritual strength. Others simply said, "That is no ordinary demon." With no exorcist to help, the whole family gathered and made a reckless decision. We agreed, we have to trap it. You can't trap a demon. But a demon that inhabits a human corpse is still bound by the body's limitations. It cannot fly. It cannot vanish like a real ghost. We came up with a plan. Lure it back into the house. That evening, we endured it. We let her come back home. Everyone tried their best to keep little Bai from seeing his grandmother's face, because every time he did, he'd scream like he'd gone mad. We lied to her. Just get some rest, Mom. Later tonight, we'll bring Bai over so you can hold him for a bit. She grinned from ear to ear, saliva dripping down her chin. Then crawled into the mosquito net and lay still, eyes closed. But the pupils beneath her lids still twitching. Around midnight, I and some neighbors quietly locked the doors. We boarded up every window, every air vent, even the tiny openings in the thatched roof. Under the flickering oil lamp, we nailed the planks shut, our hands shaking uncontrollably. With each hammer strike, we could hear faint moans coming from inside the house. They sounded like Chinny's voice. But not quite like hers anymore. I'm still hungry. I haven't finished eating. Where's my son? My grandson? We didn't respond. We just kept hammering, sealing the house tight, turning it into an upright coffin. That plan wasn't just to trap Chinny. No, we all knew very well. We were trying to imprison something far more horrifying. A demon wearing human skin. A ravenous, insane spirit that had latched onto Chinny's rotting corpse to continue surviving in this world. We had no other choice. No exorcist would come, no one had the power to banish it, no one dared face it head on. So the entire family gambled on our only hope. Lock it in, let it starve to death in the dark. That night, we closed the final door, drove the last nail into the wooden frame. Inside, Chinny was still lying silently. We didn't know if the demon inside her realized the trap, but it didn't react. The entire neighborhood helped. My grandmother, my great-aunt, my uncle and aunt next door, everyone was there. Each person did their part, boarding windows, covering vents, standing guard. The sound of hammers echoed through the night, no one dared even breathe too loudly. When it was all over, we returned to Grandma's house to stay the night. We huddled together in silence, pale-faced, cold sweat soaking our backs. Not a single word was spoken. Day 1. Curses roared from the sealed house like thunder. You filthy dogs, you dared lock me in here? You think you're my child? I raised you for nothing. The voice no longer sounded like Chinny. It growled, sometimes shrill like a woman's scream, sometimes hoarse like a drunken old man. It screeched, clawed at the door, slammed its head against the walls. From morning to night, it never stopped. Then, it began revealing things no one dared speak aloud. My daughter-in-law? She took the money her husband sent home, for her own kid. And me? I ate scraps, leftover soup. Did anyone buy me medicine? No. She gambled every damn day. I knew it all. I saw everything. The whole neighborhood started to gather in the yard. Everyone could hear it crystal clear. The daughter-in-law's face turned pale. Hockey stood frozen. He'd had his doubts before, but now, there was no need to ask anything. The demon had spilled it all. Then, the voice turned mocking, laughing. If she hadn't abandoned the old hag, hadn't gone off gambling every day, how could I have gotten in? It was her. She opened the door for me. Hockey clenched his fists so tight his nails dug into his skin and drew blood. But he held himself back. Family matters. I'll deal with later. Right now, I just want to free my mother. Day 3. The cursing grew weaker. A few times, I heard moaning, then scratching against the wall. Then silence. Day 4. Complete silence. We didn't dare celebrate. This demon was cunning. I remembered what my grandma said. Don't think it's over just because it's quiet. Sometimes they play dead, just waiting for you to open the door, child. But then, day 5. The smell began to rise. A stench so vile, sour, rotten, putrid like decomposed animal flesh rotting beneath a septic tank. Just standing at the edge of the village, we could already smell it coming from the house. At that moment, we knew. Chinny was truly gone. We began removing the boards, prying out every nail. Hockey went first, his hands trembling, stomach churning. As soon as the door cracked open, the stench of death blasted into his face, making him gag on the spot. And when the door finally swung wide open, he froze. In front of him was a sight that no words could describe. His mother, or rather, what remained of her, had decayed into a grotesque monstrosity. Her flesh sagged and hung loose like wet tofu. Her limbs were twisted at impossible angles, and her face, so distorted it no longer resembled anything human. Her eyes, if they could still be called that, bulged unnaturally from their sockets. Her mouth hung wide open, not as if in a scream, but as if still chewing something in the final throes of death. The stench from her throat reeked like rotten eggs. Around the bed, patches of dried blood had turned black and crusted. Flies buzzed thick in the air. Bits of what she had eaten, raw bananas, raw crabs, raw chicken, still clung to her decomposing body, slimy and rotting. Hockey dropped to his knees. Not from fear, but from grief. No one deserves to die like that. I thought everything had ended the night we burned Chinny's body. Her corpse was so decomposed. We couldn't lift it without it falling apart. We had to wrap her in the blanket she died on, place the whole thing into the coffin, and carry it to the backyard for cremation. We didn't dare take that thing to a crematorium. We built a pyre, the old way, stacking logs, lighting the fire. Even from dozens of meters away, the stench of death drilled into our skulls. None of us looked back. No one in my family dared watch when the flames rose. Less than 2 weeks later, on a hot, stifling night, Hockey lay in bed next to his wife, unable to sleep. He thought to himself, the woman lying beside me, the one who let my mother die alone, who let our son get bitten until he lost a finger, she's still breathing steadily, like nothing ever happened. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to sleep. He didn't know how long he had dozed off. But suddenly, he heard a sound. A soft click, then the bed gently shook. He opened his eyes. His wife was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the bed. Her hands rested neatly on her knees, the exact posture his mother used to sit in when she chanted prayers late at night. Before he could speak, she began to talk. But it wasn't her voice. It was Chinny's. Raspy, bitter, soaked in age and regret. My son, I see it now. I was wrong to choose her as your wife. She's not a good woman. Hockey couldn't move. His heart nearly stopped. You should find someone else now, someone who loves you, who'll take care of little Bai. And when you do, just come light a stick of incense for me, and say, Mom, I've found another wife now. Then I'll come take this one down with me. Hockey felt a chill run down his spine. The moment she finished speaking, his wife collapsed back onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep, as if nothing had happened at all. But he just lay there, wide-eyed, heart-pounding, with only one thought running through his mind. Has my mother truly not left this world? The next morning, Hockey couldn't hold it in. He ended up telling the neighbors. He spoke with a trembling voice, almost like confessing a crime. There were times I wanted to wrap my hands around my wife's throat, just end it right there. But then what? I go to prison. My son, Bai, loses his father. And now I want a divorce? It's not that simple. Bai grew up just like any other kid in the neighborhood. Except for one thing. He only had 9 fingers. His left pinky had been lost on a fateful night. The night our entire neighborhood would never forget. The night his grandmother, or whatever had taken over her body, bit it clean off. When Bai was young, he didn't remember much. Just that he woke up in the middle of the night, screaming in pain, blood pouring from his hand. And his grandmother crouched on the bed, chewing frantically, eyes rolled back, mumbling. So fragrant. I just want to swallow you whole. As he grew older, the adults began telling him the whole story. About how his grandmother came back from the dead. How she roamed the streets begging for food with a belly bloated like a pregnant woman. How she ate raw chickens, raw crabs, overripe bananas. How she screamed and cursed at the neighbors. Until eventually she was locked in the house, left to decay into a puddle of flesh and rot. His father, Hockey, was a good man. A construction worker, traveling far and wide just to feed the family. And because he loved his son, because he didn't want Bai to grow up without a father or mother, he forgave his wife. The same woman who had let his mother die. The woman who had nearly dragged the whole family into death. After that, his mother changed completely. Everyone in the neighborhood said so, and I saw it too. No more gambling. No more ignoring her mother-in-law. Every year, during Chinny's death anniversary, she would kneel for a long time. Head bowed low, hands trembling as she lit the incense, whispering, Please forgive me, Mother, please don't take me with you. I still have to raise little Bai. I don't know if Chinny ever forgave her. But she never came back. Now, Bai is a father himself. He and his wife run a small convenience store. In the very same house where it all happened. Every time he reaches out to grab something from the shelf, people can't help but glance at his hand with only 9 fingers. But they don't ask. They don't dare ask. Because they already know. Everyone in this neighborhood knows. One time, a small child looked at his hand and asked, Uncle, why are you missing a finger? He just smiled, patted the kid's head, and replied, A dog bit it off, little one. Bai didn't have the heart to tell the truth. Because people shouldn't know too much about hell. Especially when hell once revealed itself, right inside this very home.